Carlos Sainz Jr. has quietly turned himself into one of Formula One's most underrated weapons. From shaking off a famous last name in karting to becoming the Ferrari driver who brings home wins. But now that he's traded red for blue with his Williams switch, you have to wonder, was his Ferrari stint the peak of the smooth operator? Today, we'll see if Sainz still has enough fuel in the tank to drag Williams back into the top 3, or if his best laps are already behind him.
Not this time, Fred.
Carlos Sainz Vázquez de Castro Jr., that's a long name, was basically born into motorsport. His father, Carlos Sainz Sr., is a 2-time world rally champion who conquered some of the most dangerous roads on the planet. Growing up under the shadow of a motorsport icon brings mental pressure that would break most people. Despite this added layer of complexity, by his teens, Carlos Jr. was systematically dismantling the assumption that he was just riding on his father's reputation. The Asia-Pacific KF3 Championship fell to him, followed by the Junior Monaco Kart Cup. But the real validation came in 2010. At just 16 years old, Carlos earned a place in the Red Bull Junior team. I mean, you don't get invited to Red Bull's program just because of your surname. You get there because Helmut Marko sees something special in you.
I have 3 favorite groups. One is the Killers, the other one is Kings of Lion, and the third one is Muse. How you can manage the races, get a little bit of experience.
In 2011, Carlos absolutely dominated the Formula Renault 2.0 Northern European Cup, winning the championship and finishing runner-up in the more competitive Euro Cup series. However, the 2012 season tested Carlos's resilience as he juggled both British F3 and European F3 championships simultaneously. And well, that didn't work out for him. Driving for Carlin, he notched 4 wins and 9 podiums across both series, falling short of the title fight. But 2013 was a proper humbling lesson. Placed in the GP3 series with Arden, Carlos watched as his fellow Red Bull junior, Daniel Kvyat, stormed to the title and earned an immediate Formula One promotion. Carlos, meanwhile, finished 10th, with just 1 podium. For a driver accustomed to winning, this was a massive wake-up call. Red Bull moved him to the Formula Renault 3.5 series for 2014, essentially the modern equivalent of Formula 2. Driving for DAMS, Carlos delivered a season that would reshape his career. 7 victories, including wins at Monza, a double-header sweep at Spa, Nürburgring, and Paul Ricard secured him the 2014 championship. He absolutely dominated Pierre Gasly, who would later become his Formula One peer. More importantly, he became the first Spaniard to win the Formula 3.5 title, and that championship win came just in time for his big F1 move.
It was a really dramatic year. I went through really good moments.
By late 2014, Sebastian Vettel's departure from Red Bull created a domino effect. Kvyat moved up to the senior team, leaving a Toro Rosso vacancy for 2015. That opened a spot for Carlos, who had rightfully earned his shot at the pinnacle of motorsport. But Sainz wasn't the headline act. That honor belonged to his teammate, a 17-year-old Dutch prodigy named Max Verstappen, who was making history as the youngest Formula One driver ever. While the media focused on Max's age-defying debut, Carlos quietly set about proving his worth. At the 2015 Australian Grand Prix, he qualified inside the top 10 and scored points with a 9th place finish on debut. Over the first half of 2015, Carlos out-qualified Verstappen more often than not. He scored points in 4 of the first 6 races, and even when a heavy crash in Russian Grand Prix practice briefly hospitalized him, Carlos returned to race that same weekend. Yes, by season's end, Verstappen had the higher points tally, 49-18. However, Carlos did match Max in several qualifying sessions and races before reliability issues intervened. The 2016 season began with high expectations for the Sainz-Verstappen partnership. However, it lasted just 4 races. Red Bull's shock decision to promote Verstappen to the senior team after the Spanish Grand Prix could have crushed Carlos's confidence. Instead, it absolutely liberated him. Now he was the undisputed leader at Toro Rosso, partnering with the Buddha Daniel Kvyat. Carlos stepped up remarkably. He delivered 8 top 10 finishes, including excellent 6th place results in Austin and Brazil. More importantly, he had essentially matched Verstappen's early season pace before Max's promotion, underlining just how competitive Carlos had been.
We had a rivalry on our first year in Formula One in Toro Rosso. P1 in Suzuka, full wet, go out in intermediate tires, aquaplaning like crazy, just to try and show that in the first wet session of my life in Formula One, without knowing the track, I was quicker than Max, and vice versa.
It's the third year, no, and it's incredible how time flies. Being a Formula One driver with so many races a year.
However, by 2017, Carlos was entering his third season with Toro Rosso, and ambition was eating at him alive. The Red Bull senior team had no vacancies, Ricciardo and Verstappen were firmly established, but Carlos wasn't content to be a permanent junior team driver. In a move that required considerable courage, he openly expressed his desire to explore opportunities outside the Red Bull family if a promotion wasn't forthcoming. This was risky, as Red Bull doesn't typically appreciate drivers who rock the boat. But the gamble paid off. In a mutually beneficial arrangement, Red Bull loaned Carlos to Renault for 2018, even releasing him early to join the French team for the final 4 races of 2017. His Renault debut in Austin was immediate vindication, 7th place on his first outing for the team. Carlos has ended 2017 with 54 points and his first top 10 championship finish. More importantly, he had successfully forced an exit from the Red Bull family. And that basically never happens. Like, ever. The Carlos Sainz Jr., who left Toro Rosso in 2017, was no longer the young Spaniard trying to escape his father's shadow. He was a proven Formula One performer with the skills, intelligence, and ambition to compete at the highest level. What came next would prove just how high that level could be.
For me, it's a great honor to be part of this project that Renault Sport has prepared for me for 2018.
Joining Renault for the 2018 season was Carlos's first taste of manufacturer team pressure. No longer sheltered under Red Bull's wing, he was now expected to help a French powerhouse climb back toward the front of the grid. Partnered with the experienced Nico Hülkenberg, a driver renowned for his qualifying pace, Carlos faced his toughest teammate challenge yet. The early signs were promising. Carlos scored points in 5 of the first 6 races, and his standout moment came at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Baku. Starting from the midfield, Carlos carved his way through the field with calculated overtakes and defensive brilliance, claiming 5th place on a power circuit that particularly suited the Renault chassis. However, this season taught Carlos a harsh lesson about Formula One's brutal realities. Despite Sainz's strong start, Hülkenberg often had the edge in qualifying battles, and by mid-season, mechanical failures were messing with Carlos at crucial moments. A power steering failure in Japan while running into points, a collision in Canada that wasn't his fault. All of those led to Carlos finishing 10th in the championship with 53 points, just behind Hülkenberg. It was respectable, but not the breakthrough season he had envisioned. More frustratingly, Renault had been secretly negotiating with Daniel Ricciardo throughout the year. The Australian's signing was announced during the summer break, meaning Carlos' services would no longer be needed. This was probably devastating for Carlos. But McLaren, losing Fernando Alonso to retirement, had been watching Carlos carefully. It seemed like Carlos' combination of speed, intelligence, and professionalism would make him the perfect candidate to help lead their resurgence.
Lando! You won. I have no milk left. Well, I think it's been a great day, a great launch. I think to have the car ready 5 days early from the test gives us...
Joining McLaren in 2019 represented a fresh start and a massive opportunity. The iconic Papaya team had been struggling for years, but under new leadership, they were rebuilding with purpose. Carlos found himself partnered with rookie Lando Norris, a 19-year-old British prodigy who brought raw speed but needed at least a little bit of guidance. The early races proved that leading McLaren wasn't an easy task. DNFs, due to mechanical failures and racing incidents, could have shattered anyone's confidence. But once the bad luck lifted, Carlos scored points in 13 of the remaining 18 races, displaying the consistency that teams build championships around. Back-to-back 5th-place finishes in Germany and Hungary showcased McLaren's emergence as best of the rest, behind the dominant Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull. Carlos was extracting every 10th from the MCO 34, often qualifying and racing beyond the car's apparent pace ceiling. Then came Brazil, 2019, a race that would define Carlos' reputation forever. Starting dead last on the grid due to an engine problem in qualifying, Carlos faced an impossible task of getting back to the front. Using a clever long stint strategy and perfectly timed safety car stops, Carlos carved his way forward with a combination of aggressive overtaking and strategic patience. Running 5th in the dying laps, he seemed destined for a strong points finish when a collision between Alex Albon and Lewis Hamilton dropped Carlos into an unlikely podium position. When Hamilton received a post-race penalty hours later, Carlos Sainz Jr. secured his maiden Formula One podium. And by the way, this was McLaren's first podium in 5 years. Yes, the victory seemed hollow, but a win is a win. Carlos finished 2019 6th in the championship with 96 points, decisively outscoring rookie Norris and establishing himself as team leader. More importantly, he had helped transform McLaren from backmarkers into podium contenders in a single season. And that's a tough task, but not as tough as reaching 35,000 subscribers this summer. I mean, we've already made it to 30, so if you like this video so far, don't forget to subscribe. 2020 season began under the cloud of the pandemic, but once racing resumed, Carlos was immediately competitive. I would even argue that at Monza, Carlos produced perhaps his finest drive. The Italian Grand Prix descended into chaos with red flags, safety cars, and multiple incidents. In the closing stages, Carlos found himself hunting down race leader Pierre Gasly's AlphaTauri. The McLaren was genuinely faster, and Carlos was in full attack mode. However, luck was not on his side that day, and Carlos still finished 0.4 seconds behind Gasly, but it was McLaren's best result in nearly a decade, and it showcased Carlos at its absolute peak. The 2020 season saw Carlos finish 6th in the championship again, but more importantly, McLaren claimed 3rd in the Constructors' Championship, their best result since 2012. By that point, Carlos proved he was capable of leading a top team, and of course, Ferrari came calling for 2021.
It's been really fun working together. It's been a real honour.
The honour is mine, and for one last time, smooth operator.
The tools, to be honest, to get in the fight. You know, we have certain weaknesses with the car that we know in this circuit are too big.
Ferrari was coming off a dismal 2022 season where they finished 6th in the Constructors' Championship, their worst result in decades. They desperately needed to turn the team around. Sainz Ferrari debut in Bahrain delivered immediate vindication, 8th place, and valuable points. However, it was at Monaco where Carlos showed what he was made of. Qualifying 4th and finishing 2nd on the streets of Monte Carlo, he gave Ferrari a much-needed podium when his teammates' home race ended before it even began. The 2021 season became a masterclass in consistency versus raw speed. While Leclerc grabbed headlines with pole positions and stunning qualifying laps, Carlos focused on maximizing every Sunday. He completed all 22 races and scored points in 20 of them. That season, Carlos had achieved something remarkable. 5th place in the Drivers' Championship with 164.5 points, outscoring Charles Leclerc, who finished 7th with 159 points. It wasn't that Carlos was necessarily faster than Charles, it was that he was more complete. Where Leclerc might snatch a pole position but suffer a DNF, Carlos would qualify 4th, then finish 3rd. And that's a very rare skill.
Good luck today. I want to see P3, huh? Why P3?
It was hard. It was hard, difficult in general for me.
The 2022 season arrived with new technical regulations and renewed hope at Ferrari. The F175 was genuinely fast, arguably the quickest car early in the season. Suddenly, Carlos found himself with realistic chances to fight for victories. Silverstone 2022 was probably the weekend that changed everything. In a rain-soaked qualifying session, Carlos claimed his first career pole position, but race day brought even more drama. Carlos lost the lead early, but never panicked. When a late safety car compressed the field, many expected him to follow team orders and support Charles. Instead, Carlos outmaneuvered Leclerc for the lead and controlled the rest of the race with ice-cold precision. Carlos Sainz finally claimed his first real Formula One victory at the Cathedral of Speed after 150 Grand Prix starts. The 2022 season would bring Carlos multiple podiums, but Silverstone remained the defining moment. He finished 5th in the championship with 246 points, narrowly beaten by George Russell. But if 2022 was about proving he could win, 2023 was about proving he was one of the smartest drivers on the grid.
I knew this, I studied this at school. I knew what this meant, but not anymore. I forgot.
Ferrari's SF23 was inconsistent. Strategy errors plagued the team, and Carlos suffered multiple DNFs that could have broken his spirit. But his Singapore Grand Prix became a tactical masterclass that will be studied for years. Leading the race in the final stint on aging tires, Carlos faced an impossible situation. Faster Mercedes cars were hunting him down, and conventional wisdom suggested he was a sitting duck. However, in a moment of pure genius, he executed a strategy so audacious it initially seemed like madness. He deliberately backed up slightly to keep Lando Norris running second in the McLaren within DRS range. By giving Norris DRS, Carlos helped the McLaren defend against the quicker Mercedes of Russell and Hamilton behind. Lap after lap, the strategy worked. Norris held off the Mercedes duo while Carlos controlled the pace at the front, managing his tires and ensuring he stayed just far enough ahead to be safe. When the checker flag fell, Carlos had won the Singapore Grand Prix and ended Red Bull's 15-race winning streak in the most intelligent fashion imaginable. Ferrari team boss Fred Vasseur was in awe, claiming Sainz deserves all credit for coming up with and executing the DRS tactic. Coming into 2024, Carlos felt he had earned his place at Ferrari. 2 Grand Prix victories, consistent point scoring, tactical brilliance, surely this merited a contract extension. He had been the only non-Red Bull driver to win races in the previous 18 months, single-handedly breaking their dominance when no one else could.
Carlos, help me!
He's even more in trouble than you, eh?
However, Formula One is a business as much as a sport, and sometimes excellence isn't enough. While Carlos negotiated with Ferrari management for a new deal, rumors began swirling about a seismic shift in the driver market. Ferrari's higher management was exploring the ultimate coup, signing Lewis Hamilton. The negotiations dragged on with no resolution. Carlos wanted security, a multi-year deal that would carry him through the next regulation change in 2026. Ferrari's silence should have been a warning, but Carlos continued to deliver on track while uncertainty swirled off it. Then came the bombshell: Lewis Hamilton would actually join Ferrari from 2025, taking the seat alongside Charles. Carlos Sainz, despite his victories and contributions, was suddenly unemployed. Sainz's response was wild though. After learning he was unwanted, he went on to produce some of the finest drives of his career. In Bahrain 2024, the first race after the announcement, he put his Ferrari on the podium and finished 14 seconds ahead of Charles. Then came Australia, a drive that will be remembered forever. Just 2 weeks after emergency appendicitis surgery that forced him to miss Saudi Arabia, Carlos flew from a hospital bed to Melbourne Park and controlled the Australian Grand Prix from start to finish. But still, with Ferrari's door now closed, Carlos faced a tough decision. Mercedes was interested but seemed to favor their young protege Kimi Antonelli. Red Bull was intrigued but cautious about disrupting their Verstappen-centric structure. Audi offered a lucrative long-term project, but it wouldn't begin until 2026. After a whole bunch of back and forth, Carlos chose Williams Racing. They offered a clear #1 status and the challenge of rebuilding an iconic team. Early results were challenging as Carlos learned the Williams FW47's unique characteristics, while teammate Alex Albon held the initial advantage of familiarity. Still, at the beginning of the season, Williams looked so strong, I almost believed they were going to score points throughout the entire season. And even though the magic lasted only a couple of races, the team is 5th in the constructors' standings after 10 rounds. But can Sainz actually drag Williams higher? The plan at Williams is audaciously ambitious and refreshingly honest about its timeline. Under James Vowles' leadership, Williams has allocated approximately 90% of their aerodynamic workforce to the 2026 regulations, with only about 5 people working on the current 2025 cars. Sainz is absolutely committed to this vision, and frankly, he had to be. When he signed with Williams, he admitted seeing similarities to what he experienced at McLaren in 2019 to 2022, where he recognized the potential for growth despite immediate limitations. The difference this time is that Sainz isn't a young driver learning the ropes. He's a proven race winner betting his prime years on a team that hasn't won a race since 2012. But here's where we arrive at the brutal truth about Carlos Sainz and his championship credentials. At 30 years old, having driven for 5 different teams, Sainz has consistently proven himself to be Formula One's ultimate supporting actor. Sainz has basically spent his career being the driver who wins when the stars align, who maximizes inferior machinery, who outscores more talented teammates through consistency and intelligence. He's beaten Charles Leclerc on points, matched Max Verstappen as a rookie, and delivered victories for Ferrari when they needed them most. But he's never been the driver teams build championship campaigns around, never been the focal point of a constructor's title push, never been the man other drivers measure themselves against. The Williams project might change that, but the evidence suggests it won't. By the time Williams potentially becomes competitive, Sainz will be in his mid-30s, competing against a generation of drivers who are entering their prime. The window for championship contention is measured in months, not years, and Sainz has likely already missed his. What makes this particularly fascinating is that Sainz has become the victim of his own excellence. His reputation as a driver who elevates every team he joins, who brings home points when others crash out, has made him as the perfect number 2. My guess is that he'll probably score Williams their first victory in over a decade, maybe even multiple wins if the 2026 regulations shuffle the deck favorably. But championship glory? I think that ship has sailed. Or do you think Sainz will still be able to put up a fight for a title in his mid-30s? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe.